Big, intricate conspiracies are not proof. They're often overthinking dressed up as a grand plan. When a story needs 1,000 moving parts to stay afloat, that complexity usually signals shaky ground rather than truth. In everyday life, a single misread email or a rumor at work can balloon into a massive myth. Same pattern, bigger scale. We'll break down simple checks and real-life examples, so you can spot the fluff without getting lost in jargon, and maybe even laugh a little along the way. The lure of scale. Why bigger feels more real. One basic observation. Bigger claims tend to feel more real. When a story points to a vast, interconnected system with many moving parts, the mind prefers the idea that someone is in control, watching, and orchestrating things behind the scenes. It's easier to imagine a grand design than a string of ordinary mistakes. The scale makes the problem seem important, complex, and therefore legitimate. The lure of scale rests on a simple knot of feelings. Big networks imply authority and expertise, even when evidence is thin. If a problem appears to touch many departments, countries, or time frames, it sounds official. A glitch that allegedly spirals through several agencies feels harder to dismiss than a single sloppy error. In everyday life, people naturally trust a story that resembles a multicolor map. Lots of lines and label boxes, more than a scribble on the back of a napkin. The idea that this is bigger than any one person's bad day is persuasive, even when the claim isn't backed by solid proof. Psychology has a knack for making scale seem meaningful. Availability bias makes dramatic, wide-reaching stories stick in memory. We recall shocking headlines more easily than quiet, mundane explanations. Pattern-seeking brains love coherence, and a sprawling conspiracy often offers a tidy narrative. Many pieces fit together, hidden hands pull the strings, and the truth becomes a dramatic reveal. That sense of order is comforting. It's like watching a mystery movie where every clue clicks into place, except in real life. The clues aren't always real clues. A chain of small coincidences feels like a connected network when presented with a big, impressive diagram. Humor helps here. A sprawling theory can sound grand, even when the actual evidence is thin or messy. If you're trying to separate signal from noise, scale can be a tempting shortcut. Start by asking for specifics rather than broad, sweeping claims. Who says this happened, and how do they know? Look for independent sources that can corroborate the core facts, not just a recirculation of a single blog post or a viral meme. Check whether the explanation can be tested with concrete, observable details, or if it relies on vague language that can fit any situation. Consider simpler explanations first. A hiccup in a system, a miscommunication, or a genuine but ordinary error. Be wary of a narrative that requires everyone in many places to stay silent for a long time. The bigger the claim, the more careful you want to be about the evidence. And yes, the more you may need to see something that truly stands up to scrutiny. In the end, scale should invite scrutiny, not stamp approval. Complexity versus credibility, distinguishing signal from noise. Complex networks can produce patterns that look meaningful even when they are random. Noise can masquerade as signal, especially when a story strings together many moving parts. A long, tangled chain of cause and effect can feel persuasive simply because it looks careful. In real life, the simplest explanation often covers the most ground, and that is a reliable compass in a maze of clues that don't quite fit. When we talk about signal versus noise, the key ideas are clarity, testability, and how well a claim fits with known facts. A credible claim should be open to verification by others, not protected by vague wording or hidden steps. It should make testable predictions, not just describe what happened after the fact. If a theory relies on a dozen unlikely coincidences lined up perfectly and offers no way to be proven wrong, that's a red flag. A tidy, well-documented chain of evidence is stronger than a sprawling narrative with gaps that never get filled. Think of it like a recipe. A few solid ingredients, clear steps, and a way to check the result, rather than a cookbook with recipes that never quite bake the same way twice. Our brains are built to notice patterns, which is useful most of the time, but can be misled by complexity. Confirmation bias nudges us to favor data that supports a preferred story, while ignoring disconfirming facts. Apophenia, the tendency to see connections where none exist, loves big, elaborate theories because they feel meaningful. The social side matters too. A claim that requires dozens of independent actors to keep quiet is inherently more fragile than one that fits neatly into a few known processes. A complex plot that would require perfect secrecy across many parties is often less plausible than a simpler explanation that accounts for what we actually observe. To separate signal from noise in practice, ask practical questions without assuming a verdict. Who would benefit if this were true? And who would know enough to stop it? What specific evidence would falsify the claim? And has that test been attempted? Are there independent sources that corroborate the key points? Or is the narrative built from scattered excerpts that were never meant to stand on their own? Beware cherry-picked data, vague language, and sudden leaps from tiny details to sweeping conclusions. In short, look for robustness, not bravado. And remember that complexity is not a guarantee of truth, any more than a fancy map guarantees a better treasure. Parsimony, probability, and the burden of proof. Simple explanations win out in everyday thinking. Parsimony, often called Occam's razor, suggests we should prefer the simplest answer that fits the facts. When a streetlight flickers, it's usually a loose bulb, not a secret circuit switch controlling the whole block. Complex conspiracies require many moving parts to work perfectly. One misstep by a single person can derail the plan. That makes large, well-coordinated schemes fragile. Probability helps us gauge how likely something is given what we know. The majority of claims, even surprising ones, turn out false or exaggerated. If a claim demands dozens of perfect coincidences to be true, the odds fall quickly. People often think bigger equals more credible, but the opposite is often the case. A simple, ordinary explanation is more probable. Think of misread emails, misremembered events, or jokes taken literally. The burden of proof rests on the person who raises the claim. If someone asserts a grand conspiracy, they should present clear, verifiable evidence. A story that rides on anonymous sources or vague hints isn't proof. Critics are allowed to ask for specific documents, dates, witnesses. This isn't hostility, it's good sense. Without solid evidence, skepticism is reasonable. A little polite doubt can prevent a lot of wasted energy. Real hidden networks can exist, yet parsimony remains a practical compass. We should prefer simpler explanations unless the evidence for the complex one grows convincingly. In daily life, this approach saves time and avoids chasing tails. A big, fancy theory isn't automatically true simply because it sounds impressive. Sometimes the simplest answer is the one that fits best, with enough evidence to back it up, and that, more than anything, keeps our thinking grounded. Methods and tests. How claims could be investigated. A solid investigation begins with a clear, testable statement of what is claimed. Without precision, you're chasing ideas that drift apart as soon as a single question lands. Translate a big claim into concrete predictions you could check one by one. If someone says a secret network moves events, ask what observable outcomes would show that is true in different places and at different times. List a few testable bets like this should happen under these conditions, or these sources should all point to the same conclusion. This keeps the search grounded and stops it from spiraling into endless what-ifs. And a little humor helps here. If the claim feels like magic, you're probably barking up the wrong tree. When you look for evidence, start with sources you can verify. Favor primary documents, direct records, and independent checks rather than secondhand captions or rumors. Check who created a piece of information, when, and why. Ask, can the author be trusted on this topic? Is there a trail first can follow? Look for consistency across different kinds of sources, documents, data, observable outcomes, instead of just one glowing testimony. Think about the chain of custody for any material like photos or emails. Who touched it, even a little, and how it might have changed along the way. A practical rule is to treat a single sensational source with healthy skepticism and seek a second, independent voice. It's like not buying the first house you tour because the kitchen looks nice. You want the whole neighborhood to feel right. Testing predictions is where the rubber meets the road. Favor ideas you could try to falsify, not ones that fit only by stretching the facts. Sometimes you can run small experiments or look for natural experiments. The real-world clues that emerge when similar conditions occur without your involvement. If a claim hinges on a pattern in data, run simple checks. Does the pattern hold after removing obvious biases? Could alternative explanations explain the result just as well or better? If the claim depends on photographs, inspect metadata, look for edits, and compare with other photos from the same event. Real evidence should survive close scrutiny, not crumble under a second pair of eyes. And keep a sense of humor handy, because good investigation often means chasing down dozens of tiny, boring details before you reach a clear verdict. Finally, approach the whole process with practical, everyday steps you can follow. Start by restating the claim in plain terms, then build a short checklist. Are there independent sources? Do the predictions actually occur in the real world? Is there any solid counter evidence? And if so, how credible is it? Are the sources biased or trying to sell you something? Is there a simple, plausible alternative explanation? If the answer to any of those questions is uncertain, pause and gather more data instead of rushing to a conclusion. It helps to document your reasoning as you go, so others can see the logic behind your verdict. In the end, careful, transparent methods beat quick conclusions every time, even when the topic is as tempting as a thrilling conspiracy tale. Biases that favor complex narratives. People tend to treat bigger, more tangled explanations as more credible. A sprawling story that ties many odd events into one grand plot feels satisfying and complete. This bias leans toward complexity because it promises control and coherence in a noisy world. The more pieces a story has, the more it seems to account for everything, like a map that somehow covers every turn you might take. Yet simpler explanations often fit the same events just as well, and they're usually easier to test. Humans are pattern seekers. We spot connections even when there aren't any, and a string of random events can look like a meaningful sequence if we tilt our heads just right. That tendency is called pattern thinking in plain talk. Conspiracy tales ride that impulse, offering a single clever design behind lots of moves. It feels tidy, which makes it feel true. When unrelated things line up in a story, our brains reward the alignment with a sense of explanation and purpose. In busy times, complex narratives can seem more important. When there's a flood of information, long, intricate stories stand out and grab attention. Social media loves threads that weave together many pieces, and a villain with a master plan is compelling drama. It's a way to make sense of chaos with a single lens. The appeal is not just intellectual, it's emotional, and drama often travels faster than nuance. But preferring complexity has real costs. We may overlook straightforward checks and plumbing the data for quiet, contradictory clues. We tend to cherry-pick evidence that fits the grand tale and ignore pieces that don't. We also resist updating beliefs when new facts don't fit the story. To keep balance, test the simplest explanation that fits. Look for evidence that comes from independent sources, and ask what would have to be true for the big plot to hold up. It helps to pause and think. Is there a plausible alternative that doesn't require a master plan with endless moving parts? A little skepticism can rescue us from the allure of overbuilt plots and keep our thinking a touch more human. A practical framework for evaluating conspiracy claims. Complexity does not increase truth. The number of moving parts in a claim has little bearing on its factual accuracy. A practical framework helps separate plausible ideas from overblown fantasies by asking a few honest, repeatable questions. Treat it as a testable hypothesis rather than a dramatic story. The first step is to define the claim clearly. This means stating what would have to be true, who would need to be involved, and what evidence would count. If the claim stays vague, it's a red flag that you're chasing a feeling rather than a fact. Next, map the evidence that supposedly supports it. List what is known, what is uncertain, and what would be required to move the claim from possibility to probability. Simple checklists can help. A source, a piece of data, and a reason to trust or doubt it. Evidence quality matters more than the sheer scale of the claim. Look for reliable sources, not rumors. A trustworthy source has consistency, a track record, and a way to be checked or questioned. If there is a single anonymous post or a rumor cycling in a private chat, treat it as unconfirmed until it's backed by something verifiable. Real-world examples show this clearly. A claim about a workplace policy should be traceable to a memo, a meeting note, or an official announcement, not just chatter. If you can't trace the evidence to a source you can examine, the claim stays in the realm of speculation. When possible, ask for primary documents or direct observations rather than secondhand interpretations. A solid framework also asks for testability. Can the claim be challenged or disproven by what would happen under certain conditions? If you can't imagine a falsifying test, the claim isn't ripe for judgment. Consider simpler explanations first. If a product seems to fail, is there a straightforward manufacturing error or a supplier mix-up rather than a grand hidden plot? The simplest explanation that fits the facts is often the right one. People also bring incentives into play. Who benefits from convincing others of the claim, and who stands to gain by keeping doubt alive? It's worth weighing the motives honestly, without assuming malice, but with clear-eyed practicality. Independent verification matters. A claim that survives cross-checking by different, unrelated sources is far stronger than one that rests on a single testimony. Replication and corroboration don't require perfect agreement. They require a consistent pattern that can be observed from multiple angles. If a claim relies on a single chain of whispers or a single expert who has a history of questionable statements, that's a signal to slow down. Finally, keep a living checklist of what would change your mind. If new, credible information appears, reassess promptly. A practical framework embraces uncertainty rather than pretending it doesn't exist, and it stays useful by being ready to revise when evidence shifts. Humor can help here too. When the claim starts to feel like a maze, a moment of dry honesty can be the compass. Here's the bottom line about myth 4. Bigger and more complicated doesn't automatically mean truer. The truth is judged by the quality and consistency of the evidence, not by how many moving parts a story has. Complex schemes have a lot of parts, which means more chances for mistakes, leaks, or someone slipping up and revealing the truth. Real life often favors simpler explanations that still fit what we can see and verify. Think of a rumor at school. The more people who repeat it, the more likely someone will mix up the details or forget where it started. So how do you test it? Look for independent sources that back up the same facts. Check the timeline and see if different pieces of evidence line up. If a story only makes sense when you accept a long chain of unverified claims, that's a red flag. And remember the simple approach. Often the simplest explanation that fits the facts is a good starting point. A big, fancy cover story without solid, verifiable proof usually deserves extra skepticism, not extra credit. If you enjoyed this, hit like, consider subscribing, and drop a guess about a myth you want us to debunk next. First, we'll be digging into more myths and showing practical ways to spot good evidence from clever storytelling. In the next videos, we'll break down misuse statistics, fake experts, and other sneaky tricks, all in plain language with real-life examples and a bit of humor to keep it simple.